Welcome back, everyone, to Random's Thoughts. Today we're jumping into Runestrike once again. If you haven't had the chance, I already put up my initial impressions video and something new, which will become a theme momentarily, in a pack opening video for my first initial forays into the Runestrike universe. So, what else is new? Well, as you can probably tell from what's on screen up there, we're talking about the campaign today. Now, I mentioned it somewhat in the initial impressions video, but today we have something a little different. For someone like me who prefers PvP experiences, competitive experiences, whether that be ladder or ideally tournaments, it's usually outside of my wheelhouse to jump into PvE, player versus environment, player versus AI sort of scenarios. But I did just that recently because I wanted to try and experience the full scope of the offerings from Runestrike. Now, why does this matter? Well, Fearless is pretty challenging. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it in a few moments and how exactly I got through on my first Pauper, and we'll explain that run through Fearless. What exactly does Pauper mean? In this context, card games kind of in general, it's a common term used to describe decks that strictly include common cards. Gets a little weird when you're talking about digital offerings such as Runestrike, where you often have other rarities, in this case, basic. For my initial attempt at this, I elected to include basic cards as well as common cards, and then build what I felt was okay, and then take a run at it. Now, I was fortunate enough to one-shot this challenge in the context of I didn't go back and try and build an entirely different deck, as in a different champion, different faction combinations, that sort of thing. There were some variations, and I'm going to get to those momentarily. But for this initial challenge, I elected to go with Chaos, Nature, Ogma. So let's take a look at this list. So for anybody that's played Runestrike for a while, they probably have heard of this champion. For anybody who has not, Ogma features, as mentioned, Chaos and Nature. So red-green. If you played other card games, you might kind of start to see where things are going. And if you take a gander at what we're looking at from the deck build, it might give it away given the mana cost for the given cards. There happens to be a glut at 3. But we'll get to that momentarily. So, Ogma provides Battle Frenzy, as well as Savage Shout. So Battle Frenzy will give a minion +2/+2 in Trample. Savage Shout will give, until end of turn, target friendly minion has attack equal to your attack. Since we don't have anything in this particular build to buff Ogma's attack, it's just, air quotes, going to be 4. It's sufficient. Now, I don't actually have Seismic Rage unlocked, which would give us the opportunity to spend 4 blood instead of 3 for our first ability, 2 for our second. This one's 4. Your minions gain +1/+1 and Frenzy attack again. Haven't gotten that far, but as you can tell, it was not necessary. Now, throughout this particular run, I did have uses for both of the first 2. Could this have been completed with either strictly common cards before we get too far away from the rarities, or only one of these abilities? Possibly. I think your life would be significantly harder, but I think it is possible. You would have to do a little more dancing around with the deck build, which we're going to talk about now. Now, the entire idea here, as I said, is primarily focused on trying to just close the game out as quickly as possible. I figured we're playing against the AI. I didn't really remember much, even though I had done it maybe the day or 2 days before, the normal and hard runs, how difficult they were or were not, where I would stand to struggle given what the different challenges presented. So I just said, you know what? I'm going to play fast stuff and run them over. They can't hurt me if they're already dead, right? That was the game plan. So we start off with Rampage. Basically everything is 2 copies with a handful, well, maybe not a handful. A handful isn't quite accurate. A couple of exceptions. So we have Rampage in order to both function as removal as well as a buff. Why a buff? Well, we have several things with speed. Speed is a keyword within Runestrike that allows the given minion to attack more than once. So you get more value out of your buffs, whether it be from Rampage, your champion's abilities, or others that we'll get to momentarily. So Blade Dancer is a card that I respect as a general, as well as Rampage and some of these other inclusions, but as a general constructed card, and it felt obvious to just go with this right away. Since I was feeling this out for the first run, I wanted to go with this aggressive option also just to get a better feel for where things lay. And we'll talk about the specific bosses and which ones challenged me the most in a moment. Beyond Blade Dancers, we have Burning Pitch, more direct damage, well, we haven't seen any yet, but direct damage, as well as potentially removal that allows a somewhat of a combat trick because of the way combat interacts in Runestrike. You're able to advance your board position while, or rather, decrease your opponent's board position while maintaining yours due to the combat system. Because as long as their defense is equal to your attack, they're going to die and not get a chance to deal damage back on their turn. So Burning Pitch served multiple purposes. Wasn't spectacular, but it was okay. Spear Maiden was another card that I wasn't super impressed by. It just happened to be a 2-drop that fit the rarity requirements, and I wanted to make sure that we didn't, have nothing early on. We do have early drops in the Blade Dancers, but only Blade Dancers and only Burning Pitch did not feel like enough as compared to including the Spear Maiden. It's just a numbers game. I'd like to have included more, but you'll see the other cards that we were including. Moving on from Spear Maiden, we have one of my favorite cards, which is Blood Scent Wolf. I love it because it's a puppy. Let's be real. Anybody who's new to my channel, I love dogs. I love my dog, who is not... No, she's not hanging out with me right now, but I love my puppy. And I love puppies in every game that I play, and Blood Scent Wolf is a pretty playable puppy. The generation of the blood resource is pretty important, I would think, in probably all parts of the game, but full disclosure, I am new to Runestrike. I am by no means an expert, so maybe I'll eat my words on this. And Blood Scent Wolf, for the body and cost, doesn't seem spectacular. I could see this falling off as I reach higher competitive levels, but it worked out here and allowed us to power out more of Ogma's powers and therefore take advantage of the board, push more damage, whatever we happen to need at the moment. Next up was Feral Beast, which in all honesty I was planning on cutting, just was included because it, again, fit the rarity requirement, wasn't terrible, but there was a specific enemy that actually it was very useful against, or at least has the potential to be very useful against if somebody tries to run this specific build against that once again. We'll talk about that and bring it back up. Other than that, Feral Beast was just a body. Often I would skip it and go for just about anything else except against Talos. Spoiler. Mastodon actually was part of the genesis of the idea for this. I basically said, Self, what if we just played every Blitz minion? That seems like it'd be good, right? Blitz is the best keyword. And again, I'm new to Runestrike, so maybe that won't hold up, but I've yet to play a game where combat works that the minions, creatures, the allies, whatever the game's term is, where they bash into each other and they directly bash into each other, as opposed to having, especially when it's attacker advantage, which is important. As compared to other games where there might be a defender advantage, the defender chooses how combat does or does not happen. When the attacker has the advantage, being able to play something out of hand that, A, obviously is unexpected, maybe not literally unexpected, your opponent probably has an idea, but it's a card that your opponent maybe wasn't able to appropriately plan for. Maybe they have it, maybe they don't. Plus, it not only, in this game, in Runestrike, removes a threat, but it improves your board position. You're getting all of these positives merely by playing a minion. Sounds like a good bargain to me. So Mastodon, as I said, was part of the genesis. It served us very well. From there, we're also including Viking Raiders, who just happens to include the Blitz keyword. I didn't care about the Frenzy. It triggered. I never got to any of those cards. If the game got that far, something went horrendously wrong. But it was a Blitz character. We could buff it with Ogma. It's fine. Again, it kind of falls into the same category as Feral Beast, where I realistically was not utilizing it that much, except when I had to. Now, Archer Adept I actually really like, even though it doesn't quite fit this build. It's not quite an aggressive minion. It's not really statted aggressively, but the Warcry is relevant. It can clear a blocker. It could allow you to set up advantageous combat. It served a number of purposes, so this is acceptable. From there, we talk about one of, again, the cornerstones for the build, and that's Gigantify. At 4 costs, this seems expensive, but realistically, you're flooding the board with minions earlier in the game, and then whatever one happens to survive or God help your opponent, if it's a Blade Dancer, you just load them up and annihilate people. And that's exactly what happened in the vast majority of games. They were often just cakewalks for, I'd say, half, maybe more. And then even the ones that were somewhat of a challenge were certainly made easier by finding a timely Gigantify. Now, Sickle Stalker is similar to Mastodon in that, guess what? It has the most important keyword. And that's kind of all that matters. The stat line is actually pretty good, though, too. The 4 attack is relevant. It seemed to be able to hit a large number of things. And again, for very specific enemies, such as Commander, it ended up playing in very heavily, because if it was merely 3, you probably would be in trouble. This entire game plan would start to fall apart, or immediately fall apart, because you would not be able to just straight up remove something. Additionally, 4 damage is nothing to sneeze at when you're talking about face damage, although a lot of this, the way I played it against the various bosses, was just to accrue board advantage over time, and then they could never block effectively, because either I had enough energy for Ogma to buff whatever they were blocking, was able to bank a Gigantify, whatever it happened to be, and then just crush them. Or you just ran them over. One of those 2 options. Now, one of the other singleton cards is Hammerfist Giant. It's a 5 cost, so we're already getting up there in the curve. Realistically, at this point, we'd rather be buffing our existing stuff in play for the most part and continuing to pressure. But Trample is very important. I didn't really care about the Vast, but providing Trample either through Ogma's ability, through Gigantify, or innately through Hammerfist Giant is important to continue pushing damage, because otherwise your opponent just chump blocks, aka throws a blocker in front, and staves off a bunch of damage. Now it matters which blocker they block with and where, because they can't simply put, well, they could put a 1 health blocker. It's not going to end very well for them. It feels a little weird to have to play a Gigantify or one of Ogma's abilities on the Giant in order to get through something, push over something, whatever, because the Trample's redundant. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you win, right? And the last card in the build is Mindless Raider. Mindless Raider was pretty important. Again, high up there on the curve, but the body is substantial, and against a number of bosses, the back end actually mattered because, again, spoiler alert, Cerberus was a serious problem, and having it survive either through the Cerberus attacks, or through the various minion board sweep abilities was a big deal. It made a huge difference. So that's the primary build. Let's talk a little bit about the alternates. Over the course of running through the campaign, as mentioned earlier, for the most part, I was just running things over. It didn't matter which boss we were against. In most cases, we just absolutely thrashed them. We came out of the gate quickly if they tried to block. Now, admittedly, it's the AI, so let's face it, the AI sometimes makes less than stellar decisions. So do people. Yours truly included. And I was able to leverage those advantages, take advantage of those mistakes, misplays, however you want to look at it, and score a bunch of relatively quick victories across the board. But there were several bosses that actually presented a significant challenge, and we'll talk about those in more detail momentarily. But I want to call out the specific cards that I had to include in order to try and bypass them. Really, we kept the same main deck except for a single fight, and that was Cerberus. In retrospect, as compared to, could we do this challenge with only common cards or only basic cards or something like that? Maybe. It's possible. I could see a world in which that's possible. Maybe we'll be bashing our head against the wall against a number of fights for a while, or we have to make more efforts to reconfigure the deck, but I was trying to make a conscious effort to not change the build when possible. The only one that actually I sat and after a few times of bashing my head said, this is just not going to happen. Barring, I guess, such extreme variance as to it wouldn't feel appropriate. I ended up deciding to change it. Now, I initially said, well, I'm going to just rework the whole deck. And then it occurred to me as I was looking through the card pool that I didn't necessarily need to do that. Instead, I just included Bulwark and Bola Scout. And we'll talk about Bola Scout first. It's a 3-cost 3/2 which is not spectacular given how aggressive we want to be, but the war cry is the enemy champion is stunned for 1 turn. Why does this matter? And we'll come back to this, so apologize for the broken record in advance, but Bola Scout is crucial for this build against Cerberus. You need to time it so that you actually have a board position and can prevent Cerberus from wiping yours. And that's the thing. You just have to be very careful about trying to push damage and not playing it too early but not too late. There's very much a sweet spot where Bola Scout can come out and then suddenly you're turning the tide because, okay, you accrue 1 more blood. That means your 1 health minion that would have died to Cerberus's extra attack, the across the board AoE, instead now is buffed and will live, plus the Bola Scout gets in, plus it just kind of snowballs. So we added Bola Scouts. We also added Bulwark. Bulwarks is target friendly minion is protected for 1 turn. Protected, you're immune to damage. All the same arguments apply where you're avoiding the Cerberus AoE, but there's also a number of other damage-based removal cards, whether it's from minion berry effects, it's from things out of hand, it doesn't matter. There is some non-damage removal out of the Cerberus fight, but it's not in as large of a quantity as the damage-based removal. So Bulwark puts in a lot of work if you can time it, and you can anticipate, because obviously you can't respond to it. You have to know, oh, well, I'm attacking into this thing that when it dies, it's going to clear the board. All right, well, I'll protect my guy. Or I really need this to live so I can push a little bit more damage and win the damage race. They might remove it this turn. Spoiler alert, turn 4, they seem to always have a removal card. Might want to play it on turn 3, leading into there. Or if you're going first, your turn 4 into their turn 4. So those were the 2 cards that ended up in the build as alternates. Other than that, we ran through with the entire vanilla build and managed to take it down. So let's take a look at the boss list and talk about each of the fights. Just to give everybody a heads up as we go into this, I'm going to talk about each of the bosses in the various trials, and then we'll give you the gameplay videos of how everything broke down, followed by, well, the next set of bosses and their gameplay. So here goes. I didn't keep spectacular notes, at least not initially. So I did note a few different things as I got partway through, and I realized, oh, probably want to talk about this. So first up is Slinger, then Gorgon, then Venus. This is part where I didn't take great notes because, to be perfectly honest, it didn't matter what they did. You'll see in the gameplay after this that there really wasn't much to this. The fights were quick. I definitely made play errors both in these games as well as others, but to be perfectly honest, they didn't really matter, especially at this stage. You know, I was experimenting with different things. It may have turned out to be a play error. There's some where I just wasn't paying attention to what I was doing and misclicked, or just straight up made a mistake. Regulars to the channel know those happen all the time with me. So ultimately, there's not much advice I could provide to anybody. Just kind of load up your Blade Dancers and get in there. Don't play to block things, obviously, even if you could survive and eat their thing. It doesn't matter. Just run them over. There's only a handful of cards that actually matter in each of these that you'll care about. You want to know when they're playing certain removal, which you'll know. Staying above 3 health, because there's the 3 cost that deals 3 damage as removal, so getting something to 4 health is relevant. There's the board sweep that they reveal or look at the top card, peek at the top card, and then deal damage equal to its cost. That comes later in the game. But because of the quantity of blitz that you have, even if you overextend, it's entirely possible you just top deck out of it and then just keep pushing damage. So for the most part, I'm not too worried about the Trial of Myth, and you shouldn't be either. Trial by nature also kind of falls into the same category. We very much ran things over, and this is going to be a repeated statement until we get significantly later into the run. In fact, we have another whole trial before you're probably going to be hearing things differently from me. For the most part, you're able to just avoid everything. You're able to just dodge all of the individual abilities. I read, but just didn't care about the infinite abilities, the second one. So for anybody who's new to this, the enemies also have a champion ability, but on Fearless, they also get an infinite champion ability, which is just a trigger. When something happens, something else is going to happen. And for the most part, as I said, it didn't matter. The game plan of loading up Blade Dancers, loading up Blitz minions, loading up other speed minions, whatever, just close the game out. All right, last time I promise, because in the next trial, not this one, not Trial by Light, but Trial by Shadow, we're going to have a different story. But for here, it was very much, again, running them over. There's some things to consider here, but for the most part, you're able to just accelerate past your opponent faster than they can set up. There are removal cards and removal abilities that you're going to want to be concerned with, but it basically just amounts to, hey, can I make this guy big enough to survive Apollo's ability? No, probably not. So I'll just spread out my buffs a little bit more so I'm not all eggs in one basket and then Apollo pops that guy and oh no, my whole board is gone, or basically my whole board is gone. In most cases, just play like a typical aggro deck and you can push a lot of damage and you should be able to close this out without too much difficulty. I will concede that I think I took one loss on Pegasus because I realized that I messed up the recording or something like that. Something unrelated to actually playing, if I recall correctly. So, if that kind of informs the scenario, I hope it does. But we'll move on and jump in. Here's the gameplay, followed by some actual discussion about where the challenges hit. So now here's where things start to get messy. Up to and through the Necromancer, I was feeling great. I was like, man, I'm going to complete this whole thing in 20 minutes. No sweat. And then some sweat happened. The Necromancer was not where the sweat happened. The Necromancer kind of didn't matter. We breezed through the Necromancer without too much difficulty. Now, one caveat I will add to all of this is it's entirely possible that since I beat a lot of these on the first try, maybe I just honestly did get lucky like 9 or 10 games in a row. That may sound ridiculous, but those of you that have been playing card games or other games that involve variants for a while will understand the anecdote of, well, go flip a coin 10 times in a row. Go flip a coin 100 times in a row. It takes a long time before the variance levels out. I don't know how much that impacted this particular run. It doesn't seem like it did, but putting it out there just in case. So as I said, the Necromancer was not a problem, but as we talked about earlier, Cerberus certainly was. Cerberus was a serious deal. And as I said earlier, almost pushed me to completely reconfigure or jump to another build because it felt unwinnable. We did ultimately win by including Bulwark and Bola, but I was very much hell-bent, no pun intended, on trying to stick with the initial build. And I think let's go to the videotape and check the notes real quick to see exactly how many losses we took on this particular run against Cerberus. Because up to this point, as I said, we didn't really take any. So it took 8 attempts. On the 8th attempt, so 7 losses, we defeated Cerberus. I think 6 of them were with the initial build. And I just kept telling myself, hey, next one we got it, next one we got it, next one we got it. And then on the 7th one, going into the 7th one, I made the changes to include Bolus and Bulwark, and I made a mistake or it didn't work out, but I saw that, hey, this could actually happen, and then we got it on the next one. It was somewhere in that range. Maybe there might have been a few more losses in there before those specific events happened, but it was ultimately because of the Bulwark and the Bolus that we were able to push through this. The big challenge, of course, is maintaining a board with very small, low health minions into something that's pushing face damage as well as sweeping your board and then playing more sweepers. So it's important to make sure that you time your protection cards, whether it's Bolus or Bulwark, and ensure that you're getting value out of them, because otherwise the game's just going to go south very quickly. Now from there, Pluto, we were kind of back to, hey, we're cruising. We are cruising. We ended up not taking another loss for a couple of trials, and, well, I guess sub-trials we'll get to in a second. But anyway, we were able to plow through Pluto. That was way more difficult to say than I thought it was going to be, and it wasn't too big a deal. So let's take a look. Now, the trial by Chaos also featured a loss. Now, this one I could see being more variance influenced, and I'll explain why. The Minotaur wasn't really too much of an issue. However, the Inferno Dragon definitely was, and it's because of its innate sweeping ability. It's a damage race in a weird way, because up to this point, I was often able to, as we discussed earlier, either send blitz minions in or just power up existing minions to run over my opponent's minion and then continue pressuring from there. The Inferno Dragon benefited from that because it was able to grow its own attack due to its infinite ability, and I think it's kind of self-explanatory. It was able to just punch us harder. Additionally, its active ability sweeps the board, which then would feed, well, it sweeps non-dragons, but most of its deck is dragons, probably 100%. I don't think I remember. Yeah, there were non-dragons in the fuse minions, and that was it, from what I recall. Ultimately, I could see this being a challenge, but we were able to two-shot it. First attempt was a failure, and then second attempt, we got there. Now, Mars, once again, the actual boss for the trial, didn't actually present that much of a trial. It was actually not much of a challenge for a lot of these, so we'll move on from there. On the other hand, the trial by order, being the penultimate trial, actually was, I guess, kind of fitting in that it provided the most challenge of all the trials. There were 2 different bosses where we took losses on. Not near, if you add up all the other losses, they don't even come close to Cerberus. But, well, they come close, but they aren't as numerous as solely to Cerberus. Cerberus was very much the gatekeeper. I mean, it's kind of his job, right? He's a good boy too. But digression aside, Commander actually was a serious problem. And I think this was a somewhat variance-induced or variance-influenced victory. Commander's infinite ability is it plops out a 1/4 with speed at the start of its turn. That adds up very quickly when you suddenly have a board, and then if they ever, and they will, either activate their power to train their troops and or play something that buffs all of them. It's entirely possible that you, as the aggro deck, just get overwhelmed because these minions are essentially 2/4s, but they grow faster because they get 2 attacks. Each attack is only worth 1, but it adds up to 2. Complicated math, I know, for me at least. But since they get it every turn, they're constantly replenishing their board. It's in a random spot, so that's where part of the variance comes in. If you are fortunate enough to get a blitz minion in order to clear something, it's possible that it will then place another cavalry in that spot so you can continue to remove it, as opposed to it going in another slot and complicating where your next play goes. Because otherwise, given the size of your minions, it's entirely possible that you play something and it immediately dies in combat on your opponent's turn because you're unable to buff it in time, or they play an additional buff of their own and then blow you out. You can definitely win this with the initial configuration. You'll see that we did it, but it is very challenging. I was very concerned that this was going to turn into another Cerberus fight. Now, the second one is Talos, and this is where the 3-drop that grows when it strikes came in. So Talos has a trigger that whenever they're attacked, they gain 2 armor. As you can imagine, with a deck full of very tiny things, specifically things with 2 attack, that's a problem. You want singularly large attacks to minimize the amount of armor that Talos is getting. In addition, you're just pushing more damage over the existing armor as opposed to generating a whole lot to prevent further damage. Talos was definitely another challenge, and it took several tries. Commander, let's see, took 4 losses, and Talos also took 4 losses. I was on the verge of changing some stuff out, but I changed the strategy, which is also part of this. It's not necessarily just, did I bring the right deck? It's, did I bring the right game plan with this deck to fight this particular enemy? Ultimately, we were able to overcome Talos. I saw the holes in Talos' defenses and how we could do it. It was just a matter of getting the cards to line up, getting the sequencing to line up, figuring out the play patterns of the AI so that we knew, well, when are they likely to target face? When are they likely to target a minion? What minion are they going to target with Talos' active champion ability? And ultimately, we were able to succeed. Now, in what is was becoming a consistent refrain, and I was a little concerned, the boss didn't really pose too much of an issue. Minerva actually went down pretty quickly. We only took 1 loss here. So for those keeping track at home, I was incorrect earlier. We actually did exceed the quantity of losses, assuming I didn't lose count on the Cerberus fight. But Cerberus still far and away the most challenging one, and it felt hopeless compared to these where I felt we could push through with the existing deck, and I chose not to make changes. We probably could have made changes and gotten through faster, but I didn't think they were necessary. the final trial, and that is against Jupiter. Now, I wish I had something more exciting, thrilling to say. This one didn't really pose much of a challenge. We kind of ran the king of the gods over, and it didn't matter. It kind of came full circle. I guess that's a good way to put it, that it came right back to the beginning, and we were able to annihilate Jupiter. Now, there are a number of things that would be scary, potential sweepers, things along those lines, but ultimately, if you're looking to just get through it, this works. So, let's jump into it, and then we'll close up with final thoughts. So what's the final verdict on the campaign? Well, I actually really enjoyed it. I was kind of surprised. I think there are definitely some challenges for people that are not as well versed in card games. I could certainly see this feeling like an insurmountable challenge. But as you can see, we were able to construct a deck and one shot for most definitions, we'll say. It did take a few attempts across different challenges. I actually did enjoy it. I'm not usually into these modes, but I am excited to jump into Eye of Ra and go through it. Now, I do need to ultimately, unlock it. But I'm looking forward to giving it a try. Would I recommend this build? I think this is actually a fairly strong build for people that want to try and either do this quickly because the deck is fast, or if you're not really sure about how to go about building things, give this a try. And even if you have a very small collection, it's entirely possible that you either already have all of these cards or are likely to be able to craft them in order to construct this particular deck. I would call, again, specific attention to Cerberus, because that one definitely felt as though you could not play through it. You couldn't outplay it. You couldn't just grind it out. Maybe you could. All the other fights, even if you're bashing your head against the wall, believe me, you can get there. The Cerberus one felt very different. And maybe a few months from now, a week from now, an hour from now, I'll feel differently. But most of the campaign felt as though you could take this down with this particular build. Again, not to be a broken record, but I really did enjoy the campaign overall, and I recommend other people to try it. If you enjoyed this particular video, if you enjoyed this sort of content, let me know. Let me know what information I missed, what things you'd like to see, because I wouldn't have a problem going through this again with other builds and breaking it down in this fashion, or another one if people prefer something else, a different format, whatever it happens to be. Maybe we'll stream it. But that'll do it for now. So as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And Black Lives Matter.